The story opened with someone introducing Peter, a man so feared that powerful organizations worldwide trembled at his name. The scene shifted to Peter himself, an elderly man in his 60s, calmly sitting atop a heap of corpses, smoking a cigarette. A survivor reflected that Peter could have remained a legend if he had stayed hidden. Now, thousands hunted him, and his lifelong fortune had been stolen. Standing before the survivor, a masked man mocked how Peter had dedicated his life to the Glory Club, only to be betrayed. The survivor wondered if the masked figure was Peter himself. Yet, even if it was, countless assassins would still be after him. The masked man teased that no one had ever found him, and asked if they truly wanted the truth. Peter then stepped forward, removed his mask, and revealed his face. The survivor froze in horror as Peter, unfazed, calmly raised a gun and aimed at him. The scene shifted to 3 months earlier. In a small bookstore, an elderly man, likely Peter, quietly worked. A voice echoed in his mind, warning him about his failing health and predicting he had only 3 months left. Peter glanced at the pile of pills on his desk. Holding books, he reflected he had never feared death, having spent his life dancing on its edge. Setting the books aside, he stared at a magazine and thought about the 50 years he had given to the Glory Club, feeling no regrets. Yet seeing his reflection, he noted he had never once taken a photo of himself. Just then, the door swung open. A girl in a school uniform entered, asking for middle school textbooks. Peter greeted her warmly and joked she must be a third year. She admitted she only had 1,001. Smiling, Peter tore the wrapper off the books, making them used, and handed them over for free. He gently advised her to treasure her loved ones. When she asked if he had regrets, Peter grew quiet, remembering his daughter, and urged her not to live with regret. Suddenly, the girl raised a knife to stab him, but Peter easily caught her, having been suspicious. He pointed out that he knew every student in town, and the school had only been open 2 years. Her story crumbled, her face turning pale. Mocking her, Peter said perfume couldn't hide the scent of blood on her knife. She trembled, realizing he had been toying with her from the start. Even with a knife in hand, she felt like the one about to die. Peter then revealed he knew where she was from, Yongguang Orphanage, the same cruel place he had once escaped. Peter shook his head, saying decades had passed, but their tactics stayed the same. He told her she had not learned well. In their organization, failure meant switching to Plan B. Before she could react, Peter lunged, grabbing her neck and shoving her aside. She looked up and 2 gunmen burst in, aiming at them. Peter shielded her with his body as bullets flew, explaining amidst the chaos that Plan B meant if a volunteer failed the mission, the organization would eliminate both the target and the volunteer. Wounded, Peter fought back, pulling out his own weapon. The gunmen managed to seize the girl as a hostage. One of them landed a brutal punch to Peter's face, sending him crashing to the ground. They mocked him, laughing at how easily the so-called legend had been defeated. Octaman, the boss's informant, stepped forward. He sneered that even legends couldn't escape cancer. Peter's expression darkened with anger, demanding to know why they were doing this. Octaman revealed the truth. Thousands of people around the world were after Peter's blood now. The bounty on his head was 76 billion won, the amount Peter's supposed to have in his bank account. Octaman sneered, calling it the money Peter had bled for, now a death sentence everyone fought to claim. Octaman ruthlessly punched Peter again. The other gunmen joined in, beating him mercilessly. They hurled Peter across the room, leaving him bloodied behind the curtains. Thinking he was out cold, the assassins smirked and threw a flare bomb to finish the job. The assassins kicked open the door, confident that Peter had been burned to death. But Octaman wasn't so sure. He ordered them to search, knowing Peter couldn't have gone far in his condition. Meanwhile, the girl sat huddled in a corner, trembling, too terrified to move. Outside, the rain poured heavily. In a nearby playground, Peter lay sprawled on the wet grass, his body trembling, blood spilling from his mouth. Peter reflects bitterly on his wasted life, a life spent slaughtering while others lived normally. He thought of his daughter, the only thing that still mattered. Summoning all his strength, he tried to rise, but his battered body gave out, and the world faded to black. The scene in Octaman's hideout as the assassins discuss their plans and frustrations. They're bitter about not getting the payout for finishing Peter, a job that seemed so simple yet now feels impossible. One of them remarks on the absurdity of the price placed on Peter's head, but the other sees it as a potential way to escape their current lives. They eye a photo of Peter, discussing once they get that old geezer they will boil him up. As they discuss, the tension in the air shifts. Suddenly, the figure they thought was a young, strong stranger appears before them. It's Peter, but not the old Peter you guys knew. His body is now youthful, muscled, and brimming with strength. He stirs confusion, not only in the assassins but in himself as well. When he speaks, his tone is cold and precise, a stark contrast to his new physical appearance. The man approached him, saying he was in the wrong place, while Peter demanding to see Octomon, asserting his dominance over the assassins without a hint of fear. As Peter engages with them, it becomes painfully clear who the real boss of the room is. The assassins try to overpower him, but Peter easily overpowers them. His strength surprises them, especially as he crushes one's hand and takes down the other with ease. His calm demeanor only heightens the fear in his enemies. The assassins' efforts are futile against him, and Peter makes quick work of both, using their weapons against them. Peter then grabs the photo of his older self that had fallen to the floor, pondering Octomon's words about the bounty on his head. As he recalls his past, he realizes that he has returned to his prime, no longer the aging assassin from before. He looks at the photo with disdain, knowing that the old Peter is now dead. As he lights a cigarette from the burning photo, he declares that Peter is back, stronger than ever, and ready to confront anyone who dares to challenge him. Octomon drives, frustrated over losing Peter, worried that the bounty on him will soon be announced. The girl in the car dismisses Peter's chances, saying he's dead due to cancer. Octomon, however, thinks Peter might share his wealth before going. At the hideout, Peter enters but finds it empty. He then heads to the subway station. In a bathroom, he's shocked to see his reflection, a sharper version of himself, like life hit a reset button just to mess with him. Realizing he's somehow returned to his younger self, one thing is clear: the organization won't recognize him now. His appearance has changed, but there are still traces of his old identity everywhere. Peter is left confused but determined to get new clothes as his old shirt barely fits. Peter overhears two men talking about a lucrative job deal that earned one of them 80 million, contrasting it with the 1 lakh pay the man received. They mock that man's situation, whose mom is pretty much dead and he can't afford medicine. But he casually says that the man should read the contract so it's his fault, and then they talk about spending the money on branded clothes. The CEO among them brags about dressing the part and how youngsters sign any contract in front of him. Peter approaches, warning them about smoking in a non-smoking zone, but the men mock him, one slapping his face and telling him to leave. Peter decides not to waste time on them, but the CEO continues mocking him as he walks away. Peter locks the toilet door, rolls up his sleeves, and prepares to teach them a lesson. He punches one man in the stomach, leaving him badly hurt. The other man, furious, attacks with a knife, but Peter easily dodges and takes control, grabbing him by the neck. The man groans in pain, asking Peter who he is. Peter whispers a warning, claiming he wouldn't leave alive if he knew what Peter did for a living. With the man on the floor, Peter comments on his pants, noticing he wet himself in fear. The man looks confused, not understanding what just happened. As Peter checks his phone balance, he realizes all of his money is gone. He's wearing one of the criminal's clothes and reflects that the only request he had made to the organization was to not touch his money. He thinks this was what he was going to treat at the end of it all. Peter overhears two students discussing a Glory Club scholarship, which reminds him of his past at the Yongguang orphanage. He recalls how the small orphanage, which he grew up in, eventually turned into a vast crime organization influencing politics and finance worldwide. Glory Club speaks for those who can't, operating under an alias. Peter, now older and disillusioned, reflects on how he devoted his life to this organization and is now determined to bring it to ruin. Meanwhile, in a butcher shop, one of the criminals is surprised to see Octomon, who has come alone. Octomon harshly tells him not to consider himself a legend like Peter. The criminal mocks Octomon, saying that the Glory Club has been overstepping its boundaries and that their downfall is imminent due to their blind faith in Peter's reputation. Octomon, however, is unfazed and prepares to end it. He taunts the criminal, saying he has a special talent for contorting his entire body. Just then, gangsters from a top private military company, PMC Wagner, emerge, but to their shock, Octomon takes them down quickly, leaving them trembling and bleeding. The criminal watches in horror as Octomon charges toward him. Back at the Octomon hideout, Octomon is briefed about the attack, confirming that Peter was responsible. He's surprised by Peter's return, noting how much stronger he's become. Octomon warns the girl accompanying him to inform him immediately if she hears anything about Peter, as a bounty will soon be announced. The girl, recalling her past with Peter, grows soft. As they enter a restaurant, Octomon is startled to see someone inside and asks how he got in. The man calmly denies making a reservation, but claims he has a grudge against Octomon. Octomon is surprised but realizes the man is referring to a loan, which the man confirms is worth approximately 76 billion won. Octomon smiles, then orders his men to close the door. Confronting the man, Octomon asks if he's associated with Peter and threatens to finish him off. While he internally wonders how this guy knows Peter, thinking he must not be part of the Glory Club. He considers the possibility of Peter having a secret son, but then dismisses it. Octomon smirked, saying he'd give him 2 chances to leave alive. 1, the guy could reveal his whereabouts and walk out scot-free, or 2, he could resist and take a bullet to the head. Peter, unfazed, calmly replies that he doesn't like either of Octomon's options. He mocks Octomon, saying that no one has survived hearing what he's about to say. Then, he reveals the 3rd option: he is Peter. Peter calmly sits, enjoying his meal while Octomon is in shock, unable to believe what Peter has just said. Peter taunts him, mocking him for his apparent hearing loss and confirming that he finished the 2 men. Octomon is confused, wondering why Peter would finish his men, but Peter remains unfazed, continuing to enjoy his food. Octomon, trying to regain control of the situation, threatens Peter with a real gun, telling him to cut the act. His man prepares to shoot Peter, while Octomon presses for information about Peter's connection to the man before him. Peter, still cool, suggests that if Octomon really wants to know, there's only one way to find out: finish him off. Octomon, grinning, orders his men to attack Peter, but before his man fires, Peter swiftly strikes the man in the neck with a chopstick, taking him down instantly. The girl, startled by the speed and precision, sees the fatal wound. Octomon watches in disbelief, realizing that Peter's skills go beyond anything he expected. Despite the shock, Octomon tries to downplay the situation, calling it pure luck, but still acknowledging the impressive move. He steps forward and asks Peter about his affiliation, suggesting that Peter might want to join forces with him. But before Octomon can act further, he suddenly pulls out his pistol and opens fire. Peter, using the table as a shield, deflects the bullets, but Octomon mocks him, pointing out that Peter's inexperience shows, especially with his failed attempt to shield himself from the bullets. Octomon, seeing the holes in the table and the blood leaking behind it, sneers, saying this isn't a movie. He approaches the table, ready to confront Peter, only to find that the liquid behind it isn't blood, it's chili oil. To his shock, Peter is nowhere to be seen. Octomon, feeling a chill, looks up and spots Peter hanging from a pillar above him, having filled his mouth with the chili sauce. Peter spits it directly into Octomon's face, causing him to scream in pain. Before Octomon can recover, Peter launches himself at him, disarming him and landing punch after punch. Octomon, blinded and groaning in pain, is unable to defend himself as Peter grabs his head and twists it, breaking his neck. Octomon collapses to the floor in a terrible state. As Peter steps over his body, Octomon lies there in disbelief, wondering how someone so young could be this skilled, especially given his decades of experience and training. Octomon, reflecting on his past, recalls his boss's words. One day, he'd face an opponent stronger than himself, and to defeat them, he'd have to wait for them to let their guard down. This lesson became the foundation of his combat tactics. He had always been confident in his skills, knowing his flexibility and training had made him nearly unbeatable. But now, facing Peter, he realizes he may have underestimated him. Desperate, Octomon suddenly jolts and grabs Peter's leg, using his flexibility to immobilize him. He begins twisting Peter's body, telling him he's been in this business longer than Peter's been alive and couldn't possibly understand the challenges he's faced. Octomon yells, declaring that it's time for Peter to die. But as he looks up, he realizes that Peter isn't struggling. He's watching him, unbothered. Octoman's confusion deepens as he looks at the man he's trapped, only to see that it's one of his own subordinates. In horror, Octoman realizes that he's been fighting the wrong person. His impaired vision and shock had caused him to confuse Peter with his subordinate. Now, as he faces Peter for real, Octoman knows he's up against someone far stronger, possibly even more powerful than the 12 apostles. Fear grips him as he realizes his impending death. In a final attempt to save himself, Octoman quickly shifts his demeanor, begging Peter to stop so they can talk things through. He grabs the girl, offering her as a bargaining chip, claiming that although she lacks experience, she'll be useful. The girl, refusing to cooperate, Octoman tells her to shut up. Peter, finishing the chaos he started, casually says he knew Octoman would eventually make the right decision, considering him a member of Glory Club. Octoman, desperate to survive, quickly agrees to the deal and bolts for the exit, dragging the girl with Peter. While putting on a fake smile, he reminds Peter to pretend none of this ever happened. But deep inside, Octoman grits his teeth, swearing that he'll find out who the biggie he really is and end him. However, just as Octoman nears the door, Peter casually brings up the last resort tactic. The words freeze Octoman mid-step. His mind flashes back to his training, to the warnings about facing a monster who would seem unbeatable. As he pieces it all together, Octoman turns around and stares at Peter. In that moment, he sees it, that same overwhelming aura, the chilling presence he was taught to fear, but hoped he'd never meet. Octoman finally realizes, just like Peter had hinted earlier, that no one who meets Peter gets to live to tell the tale. Before Octoman can even react, Peter charges at him with blinding speed. In one fluid, terrifying motion, Peter breaks Octoman's bones one after another. Octoman crumples to the ground, a shattered mess, gasping in horror and disbelief until everything fades into darkness. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the higher-ups receive confirmation of Octoman's death. It's reported that all the security cameras at his establishment were completely wiped, no evidence left behind. Up on the rooftop of a tall building, the leader of Glory does one-arm push-ups, laughing at how pathetically the situation ended. He casually announces that the 76 billion reward for the mission, ranked SSS, will now be open for all the assassins of Glory. The hunt for Peter has officially begun. Back in the city, normal life bustles. People roam the streets, a child tugs on his dad's hand, pointing at the massive external screens showing an announcement. Peter, walking through the crowd, notices it too. His sharp eyes catch the details, an ad supposedly promoting free meals for the elderly, but sneakily using the only known photo of him. He realizes what they're doing, spreading information about him, making him a public target. As he keeps walking, someone shoves a flyer into his hand. It's from Glory, offering even more details about him to bounty hunters. Peter smiles faintly. They think they can hunt him down. But Peter knows the truth, they won't need to find him. He'll be the one finding them first. Peter, moving quickly through the crowd, knows he needs help if he's going to bring down Glory. One person pops into his mind, but just thinking about this person makes him uncomfortable. He makes his way to the outskirts of the city, to a half-demolished, abandoned place where even the streetlights refuse to shine. As he steps inside the crumbling building, the heavy smell of rust and dirt hits him. He took in the sight, the floor littered with sleeping bodies. Homeless people, packed tighter every time he comes back. Through the maze of exhausted souls, sidestepping the snoring form of a half-awake man he recognizes as Captain. Near the back, Peter approaches a filthy wall plastered with sketchy ads, offers for black market organ sales and steamy services that no sane man would trust. He runs his hand along the grimy surface, searching. Finally, he finds a small gap. Pressing into it, a click sounds, and a hidden door swings open, revealing a stark contrast. A luxurious room, bright and sparkling, buried deep under all this decay. As he steps in, the sight is almost blinding. He mutters under his breath, realizing that someone has definitely been spending his money to deck this place out like a royal palace. Before he can take another step, something sharp presses against the side of his neck. Peter doesn't even flinch. Instead, he casually asks about all the flashy garments and gaudy furniture, pointing out that it's not like she could appreciate any of it anyway. The weapon lowers slightly, and a girl steps into view with a sleek seeing-eye dog at her side. Her eyes, clouded and unseeing, prove his point. She's completely blind. She tilts her head and says that it's been too quiet around here lately. but judging by Peter's arrival, looks like today's going to involve some serious corpse cleanup. The girl sniffed the air, analyzing the situation. He smelled young, no alcohol stench like the wanderers from outside. But there was no way he was just some pretty-faced thief. She could smell it clearly, the blood of an assassin. Without warning, she swooshed her stick toward him, asking if Glory had sent him. She spun her stick around in different patterns, testing him. Peter dodged easily, but the place turned into a total mess. She narrowed her eyes, realizing he was too fast. With a warning, she hurled her stick straight at him. Peter bent low, dodging again, and the stick slammed into the expensive wallpaper, ripping a deep gash through it. Peter frowned, wondering if she was even really blind. Wondering what kind of blind chick swung a stick like a pissed-off ninja. Almost like reading his mind, the girl laughed, amused at his thoughts. The next second, Peter snatched her up, flipped her like a cheap pancake. Her gown slipped in the clumsiest way possible, flashing a body so annoyingly perfect body slammed her onto the sofa. Peter pinned her down with a kind of ease. Grinning, she teased that she didn't expect Glory to send someone this skilled. But as Peter kept her trapped, she slyly pulled a hidden knife close to his side, whispering that he was too soft. He couldn't end someone disabled. Before Peter could react, she sharply called her dog to attack. The beast charged at him, teeth bared. But to her shock, the dog stopped right before reaching Peter, wagged its tail, and laid down calmly as Peter gave it a pat. Finally, they cooled down and started talking properly. As Peter explained his situation, the girl stared in disbelief, reaching out to touch his face. Realizing his skin was smooth, young. That old man smell he used to carry was completely gone. Peter reminded her she had been touching him for 30 minutes straight. Embarrassed, she flopped back onto the floor, demanding he spill the beans. She wanted to know everything, how he did it, how he died, anything that could help her get her youth back too. Maybe, she added, it wasn't how he lived, but how he died that mattered more. After calming down, Peter revealed his real plan. He wanted to take down Glory from the inside. The girl sat up, surprised, listening as Peter explained. Glory was desperate to end him. So, he planned to enter the eye of the storm, to infiltrate the Glory Club and destroy them from within by becoming one of their assassins. At first, the girl laughed, calling it nonsense. But then she paused. If Peter was young again, no one would recognize him. If he joined as a new assassin, the entire Glory Club would unknowingly plot against Peter, right under his own two eyes. Realizing how insane and brilliant the plan was, she yanked him closer, whispering that sometimes the way his mind worked really scared her. Peter pulled her away, telling her that now she was the scary one. He told her to get off him already. Back in her normal posture, she pointed out the flaw. His plan wouldn't work. He should know that to become an assassin for the Glory Club, you had to be from the Yongguang orphanage. She reminded him that while the old Peter had the orphanage background, this new Peter was just a stranger to them, which meant he wasn't qualified. Peter simply smirked as he said there's another way he can get in. At the school, the girls were losing their minds. Some were blushing like idiots at the sight of the hot new guy, while others were slapping on makeup because of course, they would not dare meet him barefaced. The new hot transfer student, the only way Peter ever sneaked into Yongguang High. As the girls gossip about his name, it finally dropped, Sunggu Kim. The girls were basically flatlining over his skin that was glowing brighter than their shattered dreams. One bold girl finally approached him, informing him that they were all heading to the assembly hall. Peter stood up from the chair, listening intently. On the surface, Yongguang looked like any other school. It was founded by the Glory Foundation, and while to most, it seemed like a typical academic institution, it secretly housed an intense assassin training program. And now, Peter realized that was his only shot at becoming an assassin for the Glory Club. As they walked toward the assembly hall, a staff girl, clearly impressed by him, tried to strike up a conversation. She asked about his MBTI, to which Peter nonchalantly responded that he hadn't been scanned for one. At the assembly hall, crowd had gathered, and on stage, the announcement for a national dance competition was displayed. Peter's eyes darted around the hall, but he was listening intently through a small device behind his ear. The blind lady's voice echoed, reminding him again that the assassin class only accepted students from the Yongguang orphanage. Peter's thoughts were sharp. wondering if there was any other way to get in. There was one exception that Peter knew he had to stand out if he wanted to make an impression. As he stepped forward toward the stage, the blind ladies filled with concern wondering about his planning. Grabbing the mic, Peter stared down the confused mob and announced, dead serious, that he was the new transfer student, Sunggu Kim. The hall went dead silent. And he wasn't done yet. With the kind of psycho grin only a future felon could pull off, Peter declared his only hobby and skill was fighting. Then casually dropped the bomb that he was also an assassin. The students recoiled like he had just announced he was about to wipe out them. Even the staff lady looked like she was about to call security. Meanwhile, the Glory Club team started paying very close attention. Exactly what Peter wanted. But Peter wasn't done. Grinning like a maniac, he casually added that he might have left out one important detail: he was an assassin when it came to hitting the books. The awkward silence that followed was almost tangible. Now let's have a great school year, he finished with a smirk. The audience was a mix of fear and admiration. The girls were recording him like he was some kind of walking meme, totally into his confidence because who wouldn't be? The scene got interrupted by a fat belly guy who smacked a girl from the side who was filming and started marching straight for Peter. Peter thinks if his bait had worked. The fatso, with his body more blubber than muscle, opened his mouth and accused Peter of flirting with his girl, Yejin. Peter, confused, said what the hell is going on before the fatso started crying like a baby. Peter, realizing the situation was gold, saw the chance to really make a scene. It turned out the crying blob was Yaisel, the school's biggest romantic loser. He'd been loyal to his girlfriend for a solid 22 days, so clearly that was a long-term commitment. But now, Peter had swooped in and stolen his girl, and Yaisel wasn't going to take it lying down. He swore that Peter would have to pay for this betrayal. Peter, not intimidated by the trembling blob, took a good look at his fists and quickly realized they were the fists of a man who ruled the Mapo district, or at least, he liked to think so. Still, Peter wasn't one to back down. He fixed Yaisel with a stare that practically screamed "You're toast," and for the first time ever, Yaisel felt a shiver of death creeping up his spine. With one punch to the forehead, Yaisel was out cold, dropped like a sack of potatoes. Before the situation could escalate any further, a school staff member came rushing in, desperate to stop the fight. He yanked Peter's cheek in frustration and barked at him to complain to his dad about his behavior. Peter, deadpan, shot back, "He's dead." The staff member dragged Peter out of there, still yelling and scolding. Meanwhile, Yaisel was still steaming with rage, trying to pick himself up from the floor. Back in the shadows, the assassin class members were having a heated debate about what to do with Peter. Some were like, should we just finish him now, while others wanted to find out more about him. The decision was hanging in the air as the staff member dragged Peter away, while the girls continued to praise him for his impressive school debut. Then, the Octoman's subordinate girl who had somehow appeared out of nowhere watched Peter with wide eyes. She couldn't help but wonder if Peter was trying to destroy the school, or if he was just some unholy disaster waiting to happen. Later, the girl's name was revealed as Buell. She heard Peter approach near her at the bench, holding his meal tray in his hand. He started explaining that so many people wanted his attention, and he had to find a place to escape. As Peter discovered more about Buell, he asked what brought her here. She looked scared and said she wasn't feeling hungry. Peter glanced at his plate, which looked like a bountiful meal, while Buell turned away, recalling their last conversation. Peter had told her that she had to say it was for all the deaths the old Peter was responsible for if she wanted to live. Remembering this, the girl asked if she was keeping her promise, wondering why Peter was after her. Peter replied that he wasn't intentionally looking for her. Buell's mind was still stuck on that same thought, whether Peter had changed his mind about letting her live. Peter denied it, but Buell explained how hard it was for her with the organization keeping a close watch on her. Peter realized there was no getting through to her. He told Buell that it was the least she could deal with, thanking her for letting her live while still enjoying a warm meal. She scoffed, calling the idea of being spared a load of crap. Peter mentioned that she didn't fully understand how terrifying this place could be, nor who he really was. The girl wondered what Peter thought he could do here as an outsider. Peter then asked Buell, who was about to leave after finishing her meal, if she would help him, telling her to join his side whenever he needed. he called her by her real name, Yuna, seizing the opportunity. This surprised her, and she turned around, but the bench was now empty. Peter had vanished. Later, at the school's sports festival, the crowd roared as the competition kicked off. Jonathan, Yongguang High's track star and the undefeated 400-meter record holder, stood tall. But today was different. Today, Jonathan had already decided he was retiring his title. All because of that new transfer student who had crossed the finish line like a blur and left everyone in the dust. Yaisol gave Jonathan a sad little pat on the back, while the girls immediately surrounded Peter, showering him with praise. From a distance, someone was watching Peter closely. Later, Peter was pulled aside for a vision test, but it showed he could see every tiny letter with no trouble at all, while he was being kept an eye on by someone. Next up was the fruit cutting class. Students were tasked with slicing fruits into pretty shapes. Everyone was betting that Sungu had been raised like a spoiled prince who never touched a kitchen knife in his life. Their instructor warned them to be careful, but soon enough, Peter casually turned an apple into a perfect little rabbit, making his instructor surprised. Meanwhile, back in another corner of the school, the teacher who had scolded Peter earlier found himself surrounded by a bunch of bratty students. They straight up told him they weren't cleaning anything and started provoking him, cameras rolling to catch every second. The teacher tried to scold them, but the boys mocked him, started recording his video, saying they sometimes forgot he was even a teacher. One guy even called him a wuss. Another snickered that they could get his teaching license suspended for emotional abuse. When the teacher tried to assert himself again, the students got even more irritated. One stepped forward and slapped him, knocking him to the ground. They started threatening him, saying if he dared to sue, they would upload the video and destroy his career faster than he could blink. One guy was already bragging about how viral their TikTok was going to go. Just then, Peter showed up, carrying a trash can in his hands. The bullies turned, laughing, calling him Assassin Boy. Peter walked straight toward them and calmly asked if they had just assaulted their teacher. The bullies sneered, asking what if they had, and who the heck was this new guy trying to lecture them. One of them hawked up a huge loogie and spit it right on Peter's uniform, laughing in his face. Peter didn't say a word. He just stared. The bully, feeling cocky, warned him to get lost or else he'd end up in a world of hurt. He swung a punch, but Peter leaned back effortlessly, dodging it like it was nothing. His friends started mocking him for missing so badly. The bully tried again, but made a big mistake. This time, Peter countered with a brutal punch, and the bully dropped like a bag of cement. One of the bully's friends, desperate and furious, grabbed a brick and hurled it at Peter. But Peter turned and smashed it with his bare hand like it was made of paper. The fight was over. All the bullies immediately dropped to their knees, begging for mercy, fear written all over their faces. Peter turned back to the teacher, who was still sitting on the floor, asking if he was all right. The teacher, thankful but still fuming, grumbled that Peter still hadn't learned not to fight on school grounds. As Peter noticed a fallen phone on the ground, he picked it up, probably dropped by one of the bullies. The teacher kept scolding him, but Peter was busy noticing the TikTok video still recording. As Peter was busy deleting it, the teacher lunged at him. Peter quickly blocked the clumsy attack. The teacher then gave a weird smile and muttered that he has got an eye for talent. Peter, confused, asked what he meant. The teacher explained that despite the chaos, Peter hadn't spilled a single drop of tea from the cup he had been holding earlier. That kind of precision wasn't normal. Curious, the teacher asked Peter where he learned to fight like that. Revenge flickered across Peter's face as memories of the Glory Club flashed through his mind. The people who had destroyed his life, his home, and his family. The ones who had taken everything from him. But he quickly covered it up with a casual answer. Peter shrugged, saying he might as well be dead. The teacher smiled knowingly and told him to join the volunteer club. Peter hid a smirk. He had been waiting for this moment. As he was led down a hallway, Peter pieced it together. Mr. Lee had been keeping an eye on him all along. Mr. Lee, the so-called teacher, wasn't just some school staff member. He was the Glory Club's assassin coach. Mr. Lee talked as they walked, explaining that Yongguang had an assassin training class. He quickly corrected himself, a volunteer club, where only the elite were selected to join and trained to become assassins. Finally, they reached a door. Mr. Lee gave Peter a warning. It wasn't going to be easy. Then he opened the door with a click and stepped aside, welcoming him to the club, where glory fostered their next generation of assassins. As Peter stood frozen, he could hardly believe this was the so-called assassin training club. Inside, students were just chilling and having fun. Mr. Lee stepped onto the dais, he welcomed everyone's attention and declared that a new volunteer would be joining them starting today. In the crowd, Yuna's eyes widened in shock when she spotted Peter. Their eyes met, and Peter cheekily winked at her, which made Yuna even more confused and nervous. She wondered if he was trying to be friendly or if something was seriously fishy about this guy. Peter introduced himself as Sungu, observing how ordinary the club looked for a supposed assassin training ground. Two bulky guys shot him unpleasant looks, clearly not thrilled by his presence. While internally they were thinking, at least have a few burly ones around here. The two quickly objected to his arrival, mocking that only guys from Yongguang Orphanage were allowed in this club. They labeled Peter a nepotism entry. The big guy introduced himself as Biggie Dakko, and the other one, Junior Dakko. Peter remembered he was indeed from Yongguang Orphanage, but decided to keep that information to himself. Mr. Lee suggested they hold a quick welcoming ceremony. Few guys grinned wickedly, picking up their practice blades, their smiles sending a chill down the spine of anyone watching. This was Glory's brutal training, no sugarcoating. While the Dakko guys stepped up too, claiming they would be the first to welcome Peter properly. Yuna, panicking, tried to stop the guys, knowing Peter could wipe them all out in an instant. One of the Dakko brothers shoved her aside, warning her he'd smack her too if she got in the way. Yuna clenched her fists, frustrated. She was just trying to save them from Peter, not the other way around. As the two Dakko brothers confronted Peter, they sneered and asked if he had any real fighting experience. Peter casually lied that he had been in a few scraps. In reality, he had survived more than 1,500 life or death fights. The brothers grinned wickedly and charged at him, weapons raised, claiming this would be his final fight. Peter dodged and blocked with ease, fending off both simultaneously. Still, the Dakko brothers kept yelling that there was no place here for a lazy Nippo brat like him. They shouted about risking their lives every day to become legendary assassins, just like their idol. Curious, Peter wondered who their so-called idol was. As they continued fighting, the brothers proudly declared they idolized none other than Apostle Peter, a name that stirred old memories within Peter. Despite their exhaustion, the Dakko brothers tried to save face by boasting to the watching students. Peter, however, grew tired of the mess. He told them flatly to stop completing each other's sentences and just attack him properly together. Insulted, the brothers went into a dash stance, yelling about their 18 years of painful training. Peter chuckled inwardly, thinking he had been through 65 years of brutal fighting himself. The Dakko brothers launched their final attack. After a flurry of strikes, they somehow managed to stay standing, drenched in sweat, pretending they had beaten Peter. The students clapped, gossiping amongst themselves, assuming the newcomer had flown off in fear. Meanwhile, Peter strolled through the corridor, hands casually in his pockets. Yuna blocked his path, arms crossed, glaring up at him. She demanded to know if he really thought he was better than everyone else at the volunteer club. Peter blinked innocently, putting on a perfect act of cluelessness. Yuna snapped that he couldn't fool her, she had been watching the whole time. She pointed out how he hadn't even clenched his fists once during the fight. Peter quickly tried to cover it up, flashing a sheepish smile and claiming he always gave his best when fighting. But Yuna wasn't letting him off that easy. She called him a liar straight to his face, pointing out again that unlike those two goofballs, the Dakko brothers, Peter hadn't even broken a sweat. Before Peter could wiggle out of it, Yuna suddenly stepped closer, blocking his way and effectively trapping him. Stared directly into his eyes, she asked what he was really up to. She said it was already suspicious enough that he snuck into this school, and now he was hiding his true strength. He had to have some kind of plan. Peter looked at her and said if she truly wanted to know. Then Peter slid down the wall and darted away, calling over that they'd have to take a rain check. It was time for lunch. Yuna stood there, furious, shouting after him that it was midnight. Meanwhile, at a bus parking stand in another part of the city, a driver grinned. He had just landed a customer willing to pay 1 million won for a private trip. Feeling like it was his lucky day, he figured the reservation must be for a big group. but his smile faltered. There was only one guy standing there, dragging a heavy suitcase behind him. Curious, the driver asked where the rest of the group was. The man simply said it was just him, though he did have a bit of luggage. He gave one of the suitcases a little tug, as if to emphasize the point. The driver glanced at the suitcases, his eyes widening, but he quickly covered his surprise with a polite laugh, hopping out to help load it up. Just as he reached for the suitcase, the man smacked his hand away, his voice dropping low. "How about we play a game?" he said, leaning in close. "Take a guess, what do you think is inside this luggage?" Soon, they were on the road. The driver kept sneaking glances at the man through the rearview mirror, thinking nervously that he never agreed to any game. The man sat perfectly still, the suitcase placed firmly beside him, one hand resting on it. Then, the driver noticed something. That suitcase had shifted, and he was dead sure about it, his mind racing with possibilities he didn't want to believe. Back at the volunteer club, Mr. Lee stood on the platform, clearing his throat before making an announcement. He informed the class that they had a new mission, and it was a big one. Their client was none other than Mr. Choi from the Deha Group, one of Glory's biggest sponsors. The room buzzed with whispers, as everyone had heard of him. Mr. Lee continued, saying that whichever squad successfully completed this commission would be personally recommended by the chairman himself and granted a volunteer license immediately. In other words, they would officially become recognized assassins. Hearing this, Peter realized the moment he had been waiting for was finally here. The coach laid out the mission details. Lately, a series of kidnappings had been targeting teenagers, and now one of the victims was none other than Chairman Choi's son. From the crowd, some students snorted in disbelief. One guy muttered that if it was just about getting his kid back, he should call the police, not a bunch of half-baked volunteers. But Mr. Lee quickly shut that idea down, explaining that what Chairman Choi wanted wasn't just a rescue, it was vengeance. All the club had to do was retrieve his son. The rest of the part wasn't their concern. When Mr. Lee called for volunteers, the room stirred with uneasy whispers. Students gossiped that normally, they'd have to grind for at least 2 more years before touching something this high profile. If they pulled this off, it would be smooth sailing to the top. But deep down, many had a bad feeling. If this mission was truly so important, why wasn't an established squad handling it? One of the whisperers got kicked in the back of the head. Both Dokgo guys swaggered forward, grinning. They declared they were ready for the commission, and looked smugly over their shoulders as a few others raised their hands too. Among them were Yuna and Peter. Yuna shot Peter an irritated glare, accusing him of copying her. Peter claiming he had his hand up the whole time. He reminded her that this was a mission for club members, and as much as it pained her, he was technically a member. Nepotism entry or not, he still counted. He turned to Mr. Lee, casually asking if it was just about beating up some kidnappers. But Mr. Lee wasn't finished. He started explaining the plan in detail. Their first move, it would all begin at the amusement park, the site of the operation. A lively group of dancers in colorful carnival costumes paraded past the group, drawing cheers and whistles from the surrounding crowd. The Dokgo guys stood frozen, blinking dumbly at the spectacle. One of them leaned over, muttering if it was even legal to wear swimsuits out in public like this. Honestly, they had no idea what was going on out in the world. They kept staring, while Yuna, casually munching on her snack, nudged Peter and told him to stop staring already. Peter, however, barely had a moment to reply before a few girls from the parade floated over, giggling and asking for his contact information. Meanwhile, Yuna still had a dark cloud over her head, thinking about the mission. She replayed everything Coach Lee had said during the briefing in her mind, remembering how he simply pointed at a map, told them this was where Chairman Choi's son was last seen, instructed them to find and save the hostage, take down the kidnappers, and that was it. Yuna frowned, flipping open the amusement park map labeled Palin World. The place was massive, practically a small city of roller coasters, food stalls, and shady corners. And they had zero clue where to even start looking. They didn't even know if the kid was still alive. While she was stressing, Yuna narrowed her eyes, wondering if Peter actually had a plan. Before she could ask, Peter gave a casual order, telling them all to move out. As the group moved forward, they were quickly stopped by a staff member who apologized, telling them they needed a reservation to get on the roller coaster ride. The Docgo brothers looked like they were about to explode, saying who the heck makes reservations for a roller coaster? Peter stood back, watching them fume, and sighed internally. It was obvious, these guys were probably setting foot in an amusement park for the first time in their lives. He realized they had no clue that reservations could be made through the park's app. Eventually, they all huddled over the phone and Yuna figured it out. Bad news was that only the boat ride and the haunted house had open slots. Everything else was fully booked. Minutes later, those same tough guys were seen screaming and laughing like maniacs on the kiddie rides, drawing attention from the kids. They had totally forgotten about the mission at this point. Meanwhile, Peter and Yuna wandered over to the shooting booth, eyeing the prizes lined up on the shelves. The booth attendant watched them approach and smirked to himself. In his mind, these two were easy money. He had rigged the game by putting extra weights inside the prize dolls, making them almost impossible to knock down. As they picked up the toy guns, the attendant sweetly assured them that the game was super easy to win, already dreaming about the cash he would rake in. Yuna tested the toy gun in her hands, frowning slightly. She had never used one of these fake ones before. The attendant barely held in his excitement, already imagining how fast he'd swindle her. Too bad for him. In the end, Yuna cleared out the booth. She won every single prize, leaving the attendant mouth hanging open like a broken machine. Peter stood back, quietly observing everything. They were laughing without a care in the world. A somber thought crept into his mind. Watching them, he realized they all had the same kind of childhood he had. No amusement parks and no carefree moments, just survival. And Peter knew deep down, seeing them enjoying moments thinking like these didn't come often for people like them. After a while, Yuna sat alone on a bench, happily munching on a lollipop. Honestly, it looked like the only reason she came to the amusement park was to eat snacks. She sighed in satisfaction that she finally managed to slip away from her chaotic group. She grumbled internally, wondering if they had forgotten about the mission completely. They were supposed to be rescuing someone, not prancing around the park like kids on a school trip. Just then, her eyes widened. A pop-up flashed on her phone. Joel Choi's AirPods were trying to connect. That could only mean one thing: the kid had to be nearby. Her heart raced as she tracked the signal. It led her straight to the women's restroom. She frowned. Maybe someone else picked up his AirPods. For a moment, Yuna hesitated, wondering if she should really head in alone. But then, with a determined nod, she entered. Inside, everything looked normal. Just a woman fixing her makeup. The signal was coming from her. Yuna decided to play it cool. She approached the woman casually with a smile, asking where she got those AirPods from. The woman took one look at Yuna's slightly sinister grin and immediately screamed. Before Yuna could even blink, the woman's boyfriend stormed in, demanding to know what was going on. His girlfriend wailed, telling him that Yuna had snuck up behind her and tried to fight her. Yuna tried her best to explain, but it was no use. The guy lifted his hand, ready to smack her. His girlfriend hurried to stop him, saying she just wanted an apology, but the idiot insisted he would teach Yuna a lesson first. Meanwhile, Peter and the Docgo brothers were roaming around the park, lazily looking for Yuna. Peter figured she was probably stuffing her face somewhere again. Peter wasn't too worried. She could handle herself just fine. While Peter was assuming right as the man lunged, Yuna easily flipped him over, twisting behind his back in one fluid motion. Grabbing him into a hold, she threatened to shove her lollipop stick right into his ear. But then, realizing she might be overreacting a tiny bit, she quickly shoved the lollipop into his mouth instead. With the guy frozen in place, she leaned in closer to the terrified woman, sweetly asking again where she got the AirPods. Back at the scene, Yuna finally got her answer and marched back to the group, proudly holding up the AirPods like a trophy. She told Peter she found their last known location. Peter nodded, putting the pieces together. He pointed out that, with the park being so packed and noisy, the kidnappers would have chosen a spot where a screaming victim wouldn't stand out. Yuna's eyes widened. Of course, the haunted house. Peter explained further. Even though the haunted house tickets were supposedly sold out, they hadn't seen a single person enter or leave it all day. The Docgo brothers grinned, cracking their knuckles and claiming they should take the lead now, saying the real fun was over and it was time to focus. Junior Hawkdog even kept pulling on Yuna's shirt like an annoying little brother, whining that he had just been looking for her earlier. Yuna smacked his hand away, reminding him that since they were the ones so eager to take charge, they should go lead. While they bickered, Peter stayed focused, staring straight ahead at the haunted house entrance. Something felt off. The place was completely deserted. Peter's instincts screamed at him that danger was close. He turned to the group, telling them firmly to be on their guard. This was where their real mission started. Suddenly, a strange gas started to fill the air around them. Peter's mind raced, and he finally understood. The true purpose of this mission wasn't just to save the hostage. It was to get kidnapped themselves so they could infiltrate the enemy's hideout directly. As their vision blurred and their knees buckled, Peter cursed under his breath. Hawkdog's last sight was a blurry figure walking toward them before everything went dark. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, Coach Lee slammed open the director's office door, his face twisted with rage. He demanded the director call the students immediately. The director, clearly flustered, fumbled with his phone, explaining he couldn't reach any of them. His face turned pale as he realized something was very wrong. Coach Lee paced furiously, practically shaking with frustration. This mission was not as simple as it sounded. They weren't dealing with some low-level thug. They were dealing with Sangdo. The same Sangdo who had once been nominated to become an apostle. The same one even Glory had to kick out because they couldn't control him. The director tried to stay calm, insisting the students could handle themselves. They were trained. They had already mastered the ropes. But Coach Lee just stood there, frozen. Sweat poured down his face. Meanwhile, inside a dark, dusty warehouse stacked high with suitcases, Peter and Yuna were tied up, ropes digging into their wrists, bound tightly to a pillar. Sangdo stood before them, smirking. He was impressed. He pointed out how he knew they realized they had been knocked out with chloroform, a small but critical detail. When most people were drugged, they passed out with their mouths wide open. Yuna, however, had kept her mouth tightly shut. A tiny move that told Sangdo she had been conscious through it all. Back at the director's office, the atmosphere was pure panic. He lifted his pant leg, revealing a cold, mechanical prosthetic. The director's heart dropped into his stomach. He had seen that look before, the fear of someone who knew exactly what kind of monster Sangdo Park was. Sangdo wasn't just cruel, he was something worse. The director asked if Sangdo would really saw off the students' legs too. Inside the warehouse, Yuna stayed perfectly still, feeling Sangdo's sharp gaze pierce through her. He knew she was awake. A sick grin spread across his face as he took a step forward, reaching out to grab her. Yuna's heart pounded in her chest as she quickly calculated her next move. As Sangdo stepped closer to Yuna, her phone suddenly started ringing. He paused, pulling the phone from her pocket, glancing at the screen. Without hesitation, he answered. On the other end, Coach Lee's voice roared through the speaker, immediately recognizing Sangdo's cold tone. Coach Lee didn't waste a second, his voice filled with rage, warning Sangdo that if he dared to even lay a finger on his students, he would end him personally. But Sangdo remained perfectly calm, almost amused. He taunted back, asking if Coach Lee was scared that he would saw off their legs, just like he had done to him. Coach Lee gritted his teeth so hard it echoed through the call. Sangdo chuckled darkly, suggesting they play a little game. He dared Coach Lee to guess how many of the students' legs would still be intact by the time he arrived at the hideout. If he guessed right, Sangdo promised, he would let Chairman Choi's son go free. But if he guessed wrong, Sangdo's laughter through the call sent chills down the spine of everyone in the office. Coach Lee's hand trembled against the desk. He knew Sangdo wasn't bluffing. After ending the call, Sangdo's playful demeanor vanished, replaced by irritation. He barked orders at his juniors, telling them to search the place quickly. The students had already become targets, and time was running out. He warned them that the real fun was about to start. Meanwhile, Yuna shifted slightly, whispering toward Peter. She called to him quietly, hoping he would respond. His mouth hung slightly open, wondering if he was really still out cold. She glanced around carefully, then took off one of her shoes, stretching her foot toward Peter's face. She lightly tapped him. Peter suddenly twitched and smirked. Yuna's face flushed red when she realized he had been awake all along. She hurried to explain herself, stammering that she had only meant to pinch him. Peter teased her under his breath, saying if she was trying to wake him up with the smell of her feet. Determined to be useful, Yuna started slamming her bound wrists against her knees, trying to break free using the techniques she learned during training. But then she froze. Peter casually lifted his hands completely free. He had already untied himself a while ago, but had kept it hidden in case he needed the element of surprise. Yuna stared at him like he had grown another head. Then Yuna, speaking slowly, explained that the kidnapper was tied to Glory, as it wasn't some ordinary kidnapping case. Peter nodded, saying he already knew. He asked Yuna if she liked gambling, Yuna in confusion. Peter's silence signaling that things were about to get even crazier. Meanwhile, the Dokgo brothers, already in the middle of their mission, demanded Sangdo to tell them where the chairman's son was being kept. Sangdo chuckled at their foul language, recognizing the wild energy in their voices. His excitement grew. He grinned, proposing a bet, saying if the Dokgo brothers won, they could take the chairman's son and walk out free. But if they lost, Sangdo promised to cut off their legs. Without hesitation, the Dokgo brothers accepted. At that same moment, Mr. Lee was speeding toward Sangdo's hideout, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He knew if they accepted Sangdo's bet, they were walking straight into a nightmare. They had no idea what they were dealing with. Back inside the hideout, the Dokgo brothers were fired up. Excited at the idea of a fight, they tore off their shirts and charged at Sangdo, shouting that they would beat him so badly he'd need a wheelchair by the end of it. In response, Sangdo casually dropped one of his knives toward them. He smirked, saying the best games are the fair ones. Biggie Dokgo grabbed the knife, practically bouncing on his feet. He bragged that he was the #1 knife fighter in his school, saying Sangdo would regret ever handing him a weapon. Sangdo only extended his arms slightly, signaling he was ready. He didn't look worried. As the fight started, Sangdo immediately noticed Biggie's movements were slower and sloppy. Not like he expected from someone bragging so much. Biggie lunged at Sangdo, but almost stabbed himself in the face with his own knife. He quickly stumbled back, confused. Junior Dokgo called out, asking what was wrong. Biggie stared down at the blade. Something was off. The knife wasn't sharpened, it was blunt. Sangdo stood there with a sinister grin, silently daring them to realize just how outclassed they were. At that moment, Peter and Yuna burst into the room. They had broken free and come to help. But the Dokgo brothers shouted at them to stay back. This was their fight, so no one else was allowed to interfere. The Dokgo brothers tightened their fists, bracing themselves for what was about to come. Sangdo had no idea who he was dealing with. Their minds flashed back to the orphanage, to the final trial before they could graduate from the program, the Hell Period. 1 month abandoned in a brutal, isolated forest with no food and no water, nothing but a single bullet. Thousands of vicious beasts lurked in the shadows. Survival meant betrayal, sacrifice, or death. Most kids either used the bullet to hunt, to end, or even to end their own lives. But not the Dokgo brothers. They held onto their bullets until the very end, because deep down, they believed survival wasn't just about instincts, it was about willpower. When the Hell Period ended, out of 181 guys, only the 2 of them had survived, and what they learned later shook them even more. Apostle Peter, their god when he was their age, had cleared the Hell Period too, without even using his bullet. That record had stood for 58 years, unbeaten. For the past 10 years, the Dokgo brothers had given everything they had to chasing that god. And now, facing Sangdo, they were ready to prove it. No matter how sharp or blunt the weapon, they were not going down without a fight. Dokgo gritted his teeth and growled that Sangdo was nothing more than a stone in their path. Without wasting another second, Biggie charged first, trying to disrupt Sangdo's movement. Using his brother as a springboard, Junior leapt over their target, aiming for a clean strike from behind. Once again, Junior shouted that Sangdo would regret giving him a knife. But Sangdo only smirked, grabbing Junior's wrist mid-air with a crushing grip. He leaned in, voice dripping with mockery, that he won't take his legs after all, he should cut off his arm instead. With that, Junior dropped the knife as he knew it was useless. He couldn't cut a monster like him with a blunt blade, as their plan was never to slice. Junior snatched the fallen knife again, and when Sangdo loosened his grip for a second, the brothers launched their real move, stabbing straight for Sangdo's neck. Sangdo caught the incoming strike without flinching. He looked almost bored. He crushed the dull blade easily with his own weapon, shattering it like cheap glass. The Dokko brothers froze, realizing the knife Sangdo wielded wasn't any ordinary weapon. It was a kukri, a traditional Nepalese short sword. Peter and Yuna stood frozen too, wide-eyed at the sight. Sangdo spun the kukri in his hand effortlessly, explaining with a grin that this weapon was heavier than an axe and faster than a knife, a perfect slaughtering tool, and he had spent his entire life mastering it. The Dokko brothers charged again, trying to push back the fear clawing at their guts. But no matter how they tried, Sangdo wielded the heavy kukri like it was a feather. In a blur, Sangdo closed the distance. One clean sweep, a brutal strike to their arms, another to their legs. Both brothers hit the ground, their bodies refusing to move. Lying there broken, they realized the truth. This guy wasn't human. He was a monster. Desperate, the Dokko brothers shouted to Yuna and Peter to run. Yuna froze in panic. But Sangdo only laughed, saying he wasn't going to end them. He would just take his prize, a leg from each of them, and he then raised his kukri, ready to strike. At that moment, Coach Lee's shouting for Sangdo to stop, as thinking to offered himself, saying if Sangdo spared the guys, he would willingly give up his remaining good leg. Yuna gasped, her heart stopping for a second. But before Sangdo could respond, another voice spoke up. Peter calmly, without fear, offered a new bet, saying he would put his own arms and legs on the line. Sangdo's sinister smile stretched wider. Seems he liked this offer, as expected from a former Glory member. Chuckling darkly, Sangdo once again tossed a weapon toward his enemy, insisting the conditions must be fair. Yuna panicked, terrified Peter would pick up the knife. But Peter only smiled coolly. Instead of the knife, he pulled out a floral patterned tray from behind his back. He held it up casually, saying it was more than enough. Sangdo let out a dark chuckle, mocking Peter. He called him hilarious for thinking he could fight him with nothing but a serving tray. Meanwhile, Yuna rushed to the side of the downed Dokko brothers, trying desperately to help them. But Sangdo charged straight at Peter with deadly intent, saying he wouldn't hold back. As Sangdo's kukri slashed through the air toward him, Peter calmly stepped back, avoiding the blade by inches. Sangdo didn't stop there. He launched into a rapid series of strikes, relentless and vicious. Peter used the tray as a shield, deflecting each brutal blow. For a moment, Sangdo acknowledged Peter's idea, using the tray, as clever. But his grin only widened. He taunted Peter, asking how many more attacks that flimsy thing could really withstand. Meanwhile, Coach Lee was racing toward the hideout, his heart pounding. He was terrified of witnessing another tragedy, the same nightmare from years ago that Sangdo had created. His mind spiraled back to that day. He remembered it clearly, far too clearly. Sangdo stood in the center of a destroyed gambling den. The betting table shattered from the earlier chaos. Around him, 5 professional assassins closed in, their chainsaws roaring menacingly. Each man was a veteran, B-rank or higher elite assassins handpicked for their lethal efficiency. Mr. Lee had explained coldly that Sangdo had become a liability to the company. He had been fired, and now he needed to be eliminated because even Glory couldn't control him anymore. But then, Coach Lee saw it. The gleam in Sangdo's eyes was not the look of a man facing death. It was the look of a man about to end. When Sangdo gripped his twin kukris, something monstrous inside him unleashed. It didn't matter that chainsaws could tear through steel, because in Sangdo's hands, those kukris were like extensions of his will. His movements blurred faster than the eye could follow. Within moments, blood painted the walls. Coach Lee remembered the sharp, burning agony as one of his legs was severed by Sangdo's blade. That day, Coach Lee's life as an assassin ended, and Sangdo's legend was born. An unstoppable monster who turned slaughter into an art form. Snapping back to the present, Coach Lee gritted his teeth. He couldn't let history repeat itself. He had to get there and stop Sangdo. Sangdo finally got a clean hit, smashing straight through Peter's tray with a loud crack, splitting it right down the middle. He smirked, saying Peter had gotten lucky until now, but his little shield was done for. Peter looked at the broken tray in his hands, calm as ever, while Sangdo kept taunting, probably thinking he had the upper hand. Yuna, off to the side, thinking whether she should jump in. She didn't think Peter could survive this much longer. But Peter reminded Sangdo that kukris weren't made for clean slicing, they were heavy. Before Yuna could even ask herself what Peter was on about, he crushed the broken tray pieces in his hand, and that's when it clicked. The tray wasn't just a shield, it was bait. Peter had been prepping his real weapon the whole time. Turns out Peter was actually thanking Sangdo in his head for wrecking the tray perfectly for him. Sangdo noticed something was off too. It wasn't luck that saved Peter all those times, it was pure skill. But Sangdo wasn't gonna let it show. He just shrugged it off and pulled a cheap move, tossing his coat straight at Peter's face to block his view. Then he rushed in, swinging wild and fast, sure that this time he would end it. He slashed straight through, only to realize it wasn't Peter he cut. It was just a pillow Peter must have grabbed during the confusion. And just like that, Peter reappeared behind him like some lousy ghost, shard of tray in hand, aiming right for Sangdo's throat. Sangdo barely managed to twist around and block it with his arm. That's when it really hit him. Peter wasn't just defending, he was hunting. Yuna could barely keep up with what was happening. She knew if Peter took even one solid hit from those kukris, it was game over. Yet somehow Peter kept dodging, wearing Sangdo down little by little. But the fight wasn't over yet. Sangdo, grinning like a madman, revealed he had a second blade hidden inside his kukri, heavier, sharper, way deadlier. He popped it out with a snap, and now he wasn't just swinging, he was tearing through the air faster than before. Peter immediately realized he was in trouble. The two clashed again, a shallow cut opened up on Peter's cheek, and for a second Yuna's heart dropped. It looked like Peter might actually lose. Sangdo pushed harder, swinging with everything he had. But there was something weird about the way he moved. He kept swinging wide, like he was trying to force Peter into a mistake. Then the moment came. Sangdo brought the blade right up to Peter's throat, but suddenly, his weapon slipped right out of his hand and clattered to the floor. He stared at his hand, realizing it was shaking, like it didn't even belong to him anymore. That's when Peter, cool as ice, pointed it out. He asked Sangdo if he couldn't feel his hands anymore. And that's when it all clicked. Peter hadn't been aiming to slaughter Sangdo this whole time. He had been slicing the nerves in his hands, little by little, during their close encounters. No wonder Sangdo couldn't feel the weapon anymore. Peter had dismantled him, without Sangdo even noticing. Sangdo stumbled back, horror dawning on his face, while Peter stood there, calm as ever, explaining that once a fighter's hands are gone, they're basically done. He didn't need to win with brute strength, he just needed to end the fight before it ever really began. Peter flashed a tiny grin and reminded Sangdo about all that trash he had talked earlier, about how a cheap metal tray couldn't beat his swords, and then, wrapping the broken tray pieces around his knuckles, Peter walked forward to finish it, turning the same weapon Sangdo mocked into the thing that was about to knock him out cold. As Sangdo was getting ready to strike, he suddenly remembered one of the worst moments from his past. He was once bullied badly, tied up and hung upside down from a tree, laughed their butts off, watching his own piss drip down his face. They mocked him, treating him like trash. He used to imagine getting revenge, but no matter how much he hated them, he never had the strength to fight back. One day, a bully guy threw 2 dogs at him, saying if he could beat the dogs, they'd stop bothering him. At that moment, he desperately wished he was dead. But when the bully casually asked if he wanted to play a game, something inside him snapped. His heart started racing, and before he even realized it, his body moved on its own. He punched the guy in the face with everything he had. He didn't really understand it back then, but betting his life like that made him stronger. The adrenaline, the rush, it all filled his body. And once he tasted that feeling, playing these kinds of deadly games became like a drug. That's why he kept winning. But right then, back in the present, Sangdo got smashed in the face by Peter's fist, wrapped in the metal tray like a makeshift glove. Sangdo crashed to the ground hard. Peter calmly tossed the broken glove aside. Yuna was impressed watching the fight. Peter didn't waste time and charged again, but Sangdo pulled out a grenade. He threatened them, saying if Peter didn't kneel, he'd blow up all the suitcases. Those suitcases, he explained, were filled with the children Peter had been looking for, including the chairman's son. Yuna was shocked hearing that. She couldn't believe this guy actually stuffed kids into suitcases. Sangdo also reminded them the place was full of gas pipes. If he set off the bomb, everyone would die. He kept yelling at Peter to kneel, but Peter didn't hesitate. He jumped, grabbed Sangdo, and stuffed the grenade into his mouth. Then he pulled the pin halfway out, telling him if he didn't want to die, he better keep a strong grip on it. Peter punched Sangdo once more, saying this was his way of threatening them. then calmly pushed the pin back in, tossed the grenade aside, and told Sangdo to stop crying like a baby and get up, as he wasn't finished yet. Sangdo tried to get up, but Yuna, a little scared, gave Peter a heads up. They were ready for anything. But instead, Sangdo just dropped to his knees, crying and begging them to call this game a draw. He promised to pretend nothing happened today and said he would release all the kids. The very next moment, the door burst open and Mr. Lee rushed in, panicking as he called out for the students. When he saw Sangdo, he froze in shock. This wasn't the Sangdo he remembered. The once feared assassin was now collapsed at his feet, begging for help, shaking and crying. Peter, carrying the two unconscious Dakko brothers, walked over to Coach Lee with Yuna following behind. Later, after everything settled down, Coach Lee found himself thinking about how this crazy commission finally came to an end. All the victims, including Choi's son, were found safe. As for Sangdo, he ended up shoved into a black body bag, his face twisted horribly, still mumbling something about the game being a draw. Coach Lee thought back to how it all started. After Sangdo ran from the organization, their HR department had failed to track him down for 13 whole years. During that time, Sangdo's name became something like a ghost story. Turns out, the guy wasn't even that big of a threat in the end. They sent Sangdo straight to Glory's headquarters. The nightmare that once ruined Mr. Lee's life was finally over, even if it still didn't feel real to him. Peter's group gathered together afterwards. The Dakko brothers were proudly showing off about how good their teamwork was, grinning like idiots. Mr. Lee watched them, still full of doubts, wondering if they really had taken Sangdo down by themselves. Peter had already said earlier it wasn't him who finished Sangdo off, and in the end, Mr. Lee could only choose to believe him. Later on, the group officially got promoted to become real assassins, earning a rank of D. The Dakko brothers were furious, whining about why they didn't get a higher rank, while Yuna just looked super annoyed at their childish complaints. After that, they were sent somewhere else. While riding the elevator up, they started getting nervous. When the doors opened, standing right, there were two giant-sized women. The Dakko brothers were almost afraid, thinking they either came to the wrong floor or were about to die. But before they could run for it, a beautiful woman appeared, smiling warmly as she welcomed them. She guided them down a hallway, explaining that the chairman had taken quite an interest in them, especially because they were the ones who saved his son, the heir to Deha Group. They were led to a massive dining table filled with all sorts of fancy dishes. Apparently, the chairman had personally ordered that all their needs be taken care of. After eating, the woman brought them to get changed into brand new suits. The Dakko brothers couldn't stop bragging, laughing and saying they scored a free luxury dinner and some expensive suits just because of their awesome teamwork. The woman then opened a door, making everyone's eyes light up. The room was packed wall to wall with all kinds of weapons. She explained that Deha Group had the best munitions in the world and that they only offered the finest gear to Glory's assassins. The woman also said the chairman wanted to congratulate them by letting them pick anything they needed. The Dakko brothers started stuffing their pockets like little guys in a candy store, realizing everything was free. Yuna got excited when she spotted a fancy knife model she had always wanted. But then she hesitated, remembering how useless she felt during the last fight. She started doubting if she even deserved to take anything. Meanwhile, the woman approached Peter, asking if he had anything he wanted. Peter quietly turned around and held up a fountain pen, saying this was his pick. The woman looked surprised but didn't comment. Suddenly, she got a call from the chairman. After a short conversation, she politely told the group that they would be escorting Sungu, Peter, to the chairman's office. The Dakko brothers got excited, thinking they were all about to meet the chairman, but she quickly corrected them. Only Peter had been invited. As she led Peter alone into the elevator, she asked him why he chose a fountain pen of all things. Peter explained it was his favorite model from 40 years ago. The girl was a bit taken aback, but Peter quickly covered it up, saying it was a gift handed down from his grandfather. Peter couldn't help but wonder why the chairman wanted to see him personally. He hadn't even grown up in an orphanage like the others. When he asked, the girl said she wasn't allowed to answer. When they reached the floor, the girl announced Peter's arrival and left, following the chairman's order. Inside, Mr. Choi greeted Peter, saying he couldn't wait to meet him. After a little small talk, Mr. Choi casually asked if Peter liked everything arranged for him. Peter thanked him but couldn't hide his curiosity, quietly asking why the chairman wanted to meet him in person. Mr. Choi just laughed. Stepping closer, he told Peter not to be so tense, claiming he didn't have any hidden motives. But then he locked eyes with Peter and said seriously that he knew exactly who Sungu really was. Will Peter be able to keep his true identity hidden, or will he finally get the revenge he's been waiting for? Comment stronger Peter if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.